As the 2024 presidential field continues to take shape, as we mentioned at the top of the show, some are talking once again about a third-party nomination process, third-party candidates. Well, earlier this week, I spoke with former Republican Maryland Governor Larry Hogan about many aspects of the 2024 race. And during our conversation in Annapolis, Maryland, I asked Hogan if he would seek the nomination of the no-labels third-party ticket.
There's been an awful lot of people kind of attacking that effort, but you just don't know. Right now, there are about 70% of the people in America do not want Joe Biden or Donald Trump to be president. They don't want a rematch of 2020, and yet that appears, if the nominations were taking place today, that would be the case. And so if two-thirds of the people in the country really don't want either one of choice A or choice B, then I don't think you can close the door to C, which would be a unity ticket, put up someone else. And it's never happened before. It's never been successful. It's not something I'm pursuing, but it's you've got to leave the door open in case of emergency, break glass.
Would you be at the top of that ticket?
I mean, I think there are certainly a lot of people that would feel that I'd be a potential person.
How do you feel about it?
I think it's a long way off, and my efforts right now are trying to stop Donald Trump from being the Republican nominee, and I'm hoping that one of my friends will be able to beat him, and then I can get behind them.
As you look at the Republican field, Governor, evaluate Ron DeSantis so far.
I think DeSantis has really underperformed. You know, he started out, and we've seen this happen before in other races, but he was the one getting all the attention. He was wall-to-wall coverage on Fox News. He was the only one other than Trump that was really getting a lot of attention. He raised a ton of money. He was a fairly successful governor in a big state who got reelected, and then he started, making all kinds of mistakes. I think the campaign is one of the worst I've seen so far, and he's dropped like a rock. And so I think people started to say, well, maybe we're willing to consider someone other than Trump. They took a look at Ron DeSantis and then went back to Trump. So I think he dropped 18, 20 points in the polls, and now you're seeing other people rise up. And there were a whole bunch of people stuck in single digits. I was one of them. We were all statistically, within the margin of error of each other. There were 7 or 8 different people. One of them, I think, has a chance to surpass Ron DeSantis.
Is it over for DeSantis?
I think it's getting close to being over. I mean, you can always, you see comebacks. John McCain pulled a comeback and Bill Clinton pulled a comeback, but at this point, he's headed in the wrong direction.
And if you were to describe the central mistake he made, what would it be?
I think the culture wars, the dumb comments about Ukraine, the fact that he's got some strengths, but he's also got some weaknesses. I mean, he just doesn't connect with people. He's not a good campaigner. He's not a good debater. He's a smart guy. Went to Yale and Harvard.
Doesn't lead with that.
Yeah, he doesn't lead with that. He says he went to school in the Northeast somewhere. I think, everybody was thinking he was the guy to beat, and now I don't think too many people think that.
If the nominations were propounded today, it would be Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Do you think that's how it's going to end up?
I can't really give a percentage, but look, if you go back to the 2016 election, at this point in time, everyone thought that either Scott Walker or Jeb Bush were going to be the nominee. Donald Trump was at 1% or less than 1%. So it dramatically changed. Joe Biden was not expected to be the Democratic nominee. There were people that were counting him out, and he came back and was a nominee. So I think the same thing could happen this time. Someone we're not even expecting could rise up. But conversely, we could be stuck with, 2 unacceptable candidates that the overwhelming majority of America doesn't want.
In your mind, of those 2 unacceptable candidates, which is more unacceptable?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, look, I think Trump has obviously disqualified himself from being president. I didn't support him in the last 2 elections and don't think he should be anywhere near the White House again. I also don't think that Joe Biden is, at this point, with all due respect, I'm not sure he's capable enough to be the leader of the free world. And He's got some strong issues. I mean, it's sort of like, his slogan should be "Don't believe your lying eyes." I mean, a majority of Democrats don't believe he should be the nominee and don't think he should be the president.
Governor, when you say Joe Biden doesn't have the capabilities, do you mean physical and intellectual, or do you mean ideological?
I hate to say that because I don't want to be critical, and I want the president to be successful, but I do believe he's diminished. He's not the same Joe Biden he used to be, and we've seen it. We've all seen, the gaffes and the stumbling, he's 80 years old. I think he and Trump are both, perhaps they'd be the two oldest presidents in history, and we might need somebody a little bit younger.